Hi, Miss Graham.
Good morning. Can I ask you a couple of things relating to yesterday's evidence?
Yes.
And the first is that you'd mentioned yesterday you did actually consider that this might go to a public inquiry because you were aware of a public inquiry previously, so that was in the back of your head or the back of your mind. And I'd like to know, what previous public inquiry were you aware of at that time? Do you remember?
Yeah, the public inquiry for the death of the male who I'd found in the cells had died went to a public inquiry. So when this incident happened, this is the second time I've been involved in an incident involving that. So I knew there was a previous public inquiry. I thought it may happen again.
And when you say public inquiry, do you mean like an FAI, a fatal accident inquiry, or something along those lines? Or do you actually mean a public inquiry, like ourselves?
I couldn't actually give you the definition. I did Google it. It was 2007, and it went to an inquiry, whether it was a FAI or a public inquiry, one of the two. But it certainly was reviewed.
That's fine. I just wanted to check that. And then you'll remember yesterday, just shortly prior to lunch and just after lunch, I asked you a number of questions about the reference to the black male having been found dead.
Yes.
The words found dead. And I explained to you that Colette Bell had given evidence to the inquiry that she'd been told that a black male had been found dead. And you accepted that Sheku Bayo hadn't been found dead, but you couldn't say for certain what words were used by you when you spoke to DC Parker and DC Mitchell, when you said to DC Parker you wanted the death message relayed to Colette Bell. Do you remember me asking you about that yesterday? Yes. And we went through your day book, which I believe you'll still have with you.
Yes.
And we looked at the words blackmail dead that you'd noted down.
Yes.
On the day book. And I think I asked you whether you could think of anything that you'd said to DC Parker that might indicate in any way that the blackmail had been found dead, and you didn't think there was anything. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Can I ask you to look again at your inquiry statement, please? We looked at this yesterday. It's SBPI 00228 and it's paragraph 53. And I did ask you about this yesterday. And it was about the CCTV issue. And you had made a call to, I think, Technical Support Unit, or there you have them as TSU.
That's right, yes.
Yeah. And I asked you about the CCTV in the van, and you'd indicated there was a problem with it.
That's correct, I remember that.
When you looked at your day book yesterday, you noted that there was a handwritten note that at 2 minutes past 10 in the morning, 10:02, it said TSU, and I think you said yesterday in evidence that's the time that I have either phoned TSU or got their number.
Yeah, I believe that to be the case, yeah, because it's got the time next to it.
And that was on the 3rd of May 2015.
Yes.
There's reference in paragraph 53, which is still on the screen, to the airwave call. And what I'd like to do is play this tape. You'll hear it within the speakers within the room. And then what I'll do is I'll ask you some questions about it afterwards. There's the transcript is actually in paragraph 53, but we'll play the audio anyway, if that's okay. Thank you.
Request, is it? It's basically, we have CCTV recording in one of the vans, which is attended at its locus where the male's been found dead. Right. After the altercation with police officers. There is a possibility that the CCTV in the van will have covered the incident, so the on-call detective super's asking for the out of TSU or whoever can download that footage, be called out, be called to duty and do it.
Yeah, well, it wasn't obviously he didn't account that. Because they will ask what the hell they're wanting.
Yeah, I can imagine, but they're basically saying they're needing somebody out, as in yesterday to do it.
Thank you. Were you able to hear that?
Yes.
And did you recognise your voice?
Yes.
And that was the explanation you were giving to TSU when you called them?
That was to the control room about getting
sorry.
the number for TSU, but that's yes.
Yeah, sorry, to the control room. And during that conversation, if you look at paragraph 53, which is the sort of transcript, if you like, of that call, you'll see that you have said there, in relation to the van, so paragraph 53, that is attending the locus, where the male has been found dead after altercation with the police officers. And so it would appear that in that call to the control room, you used the phrase found dead. And I just wondered, having listened to that call that you made on the 3rd of May, would you maybe accept that there is a possibility that you've used that phrase at some point during the day, found dead?
I definitely have, because I've used it on that call, and I've used it in my statement the next day, and I've used it in the Perk statement, and I've used it later. It's a term that I've used without understanding the importance of the word found.
So it's possible that when you spoke to DC Parker, that you maybe did use the words found dead?
I would love to be able to tell you definitely what it is, but I genuinely can't. I may have used that word. Did I want to use the word? That's not the message that we were looking to put across, but can I say that for certain? I can't.
All right, thank you. Can I ask you about operational statements very briefly? We've heard from Officers Mitchell and Parker about their operational statements, and we've heard that you asked DC Mitchell to beef up his statement, and then in his inquiry statement, I think you've been asked about asking Mitchell, at the very least, to ask for a more comprehensive statement. What do you mean by beefing up a statement?
I don't know if I was asked to ask him to do that, or if I've done that myself. But if I've looked at their statements and thought, you need to give more information, you need to be clear about what we've done, when we've done it, how we've done it, I would ask someone to beef up, would be a term that I would use. So add more to it, more information to it.
So is it simply adding more detail or more information rather than anything else?
A bit of both, more detail. If I think there wasn't enough information, so the people that are coming in and reviewing that can read it and be clear about what exactly is taking place.
So it's with one eye on maybe someone looking at it at a later time?
It's to make it easier for people that are coming in to look at this afterwards. Because if I'm getting things handed to me by a shift, sometimes I read it and go, well, what about X, Y and Z? You want to make it easier for the person that's receiving that if you can answer these questions first.
And to what extent would you be thinking maybe these statements are inadequate or insufficient, or is it more with a view to providing more information to people coming later?
It's more a view to helping whoever's picking up this inquiry, so they can actually know what's been said or how it's been said or what they've exactly done.
Right, thank you. Can I ask you to look at paragraph 166 of your inquiry statement, please? This relates to the period prior to you becoming aware that Mr. Bio had died. So prior to 09:04 in the morning, when he was pronounced life extinct. And you've been asked to refer to part of your own PERC statement at that time. And it says, prior to life being pronounced extinct and formal identification of the accused, I asked for checks to be carried out on Mr. Bio to establish any criminal history, images, identification marks, or police markers listed on police systems. I only became aware of his details following the call to the police by Colette Bell expressing concern for her partner, Sheku. And so I just wanted to be clear about the chronology of events again, if I may. Is it the case that obviously you've talked yesterday about identification being important because at the very early stages you didn't know who it was in Hayfield Road who'd been restrained.
Yes.
And you asked for some checks to be carried out by a member of the police staff. Was that to see if you could get more information about identification?
Yes.
Right. And as I understand it, you've indicated, you'll see at the bottom of page, at 169, if we go down further, you'll see that you mentioned that was by Lorraine Dewar, one of the inquiry office assistants that
Yes.
you spoke to. And you asked her to do some checks for you. And she was looking for maybe images or anything like that you would have on a database. Is it called CHS?
That's correct.
What does that stand for? CHS?
I should know that, criminal history something, but
All right. System,
Scotland.
maybe. Scotland.
possibly. I think
Right,
it is.
Thank you. Was at the point that you asked for those checks to be done, I think Lorraine Dewar's statement, which you'll see at paragraph 168, says that the time that you asked was 8:56 hours on the 3rd of May. And I think yesterday you said you knew that he'd passed away at 09:04. So this was just shortly prior to you becoming aware that he'd died.
Yes.
Was there any, when you came to ask for those checks to be done by Lorraine Dewar, was there anything influencing you in asking for that related to his race or the fact that he was a black man?
No.
And what was the predominant reason why you asked for those checks to be done?
I'm looking for a quick win that may give us something on police systems that would identify it was Mr. Bow. So either a good picture of him, a tattoo on an arm, a missing finger or something that we would record in police systems I could then pass that into the team that are dealing with the incident to say there's further potential that it could be Mr. Bow.
So these checks, were they done to aid the identification of the male
Yes.
rather than anything else?
Yes.
And if Mr. Bio had been white, would you have been asking Lorraine Dewar to carry out the same types of checks at that time?
Yep, I'll do that for any death that we have where identification is not known. It's one of the first things you would do.
Thank you. Can I ask you to look back at the investigation and your involvement that day, and reflecting on it now, do you think that there were improvements that could have been made by you in the role you were in, or things that could have been done better by you?
Yes.
Can you give the chair any examples?
I think the biggest thing is the liaison and updates to the family are the biggest thing for me, and being accurate and providing them information, I think, sooner. That's the biggest thing.
And is there anything that you feel, you've told us that you had a team of officers that you were working with, you maybe didn't know many of them. Is there anything, looking back now, that you think they could have done better?
To be honest, they were called in from different areas. They've never worked here before, and they were given individual actions. And no, I would find it hard to comment on what the other officers' actions have been on that day, but certainly from my point of view, just for what I've said, I think I could have pushed things on quicker.
And looking up the chain of command at more senior officers, did you think there was anything they could have improved on that day?
It's so hard, you know. I work quite closely through my service with Colin Robson, and I think on that day we both did everything we could to try and do as good a job as we can. And when you look back, you know, at the time you can say to yourself, why did we not? But on that day, I felt like we were doing everything we could to try and do everything to cover every option as to what happened to Mr. Bayou that day.
After these events, you've talked about a review maybe being carried out, others coming in, you've talked about PERC. Was there any period after the 3rd of May where you were asked to be part of a lessons learned process, or to discuss with other officers and yourself about how things could have been done better?
No, I've not been, no.
No. And is there any suggestion that you would wish to make, that you'd like to draw to the Chair's attention about things that could be done to improve a situation like this generally?
I'm angry at myself for not checking about the officers in relation to consent. I think that as a line manager I should have asked on that day, you know, if there was a process there to allow for me making sure that was done, whether it's a separate piece of paper, whether it's an instruction that a DS must do that in a day, something like that. So that could be an idea.
Thank you. Can we move on to the 4th of May? So this is the next day. Can I ask you to look at a document, PS 00784? Now, this is headed up, you'll see, briefing notes. I don't think you've got a hard copy of this.
Sorry.
It's headed up briefing notes, and it's. We'll ask if this can just be scrolled through just to give you cast your eye over it. But there's one or two bits I will ask you about, and you'll see it's single line spacing. It seems to be a sort of typed version of something with individuals' names mentioned and references to things they're going to do. Can you see that? It's only about 4 pages, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. Have you seen that before?
Never.
Do you know who typed this or who prepared it?
No, never seen that before.
Right. Can we go back to the top, please? Or sorry, page 2 of it. Well, let's start at the top, page 1. Let's just see where we are. We'll see at the top, the sort of first line of the body of the text says, briefing, 1000 hours, 4th of May 2015. AM briefing, Monday, Hall, Kirkcaldy, chaired by Detective Superintendent Campbell. Do you see that?
Yes.
Now, as I understood your evidence yesterday, there was nothing in your day book for the 4th of May, and you didn't remember really being involved that day. But you'll see that this appears to be some sort of typed version of briefing notes, at least there from the 10 o'clock on the 4th of May. Do you see that?
Yes.
And then if we go to page 2 and 5 lines from the top of page 2, we see your name, and it says, DS Dursley, have reviewed the mobile phone footage which shows deceased in leg restraints but does not show any confrontation or baton strike. Were you at a briefing that morning?
Genuinely do not remember being involved at all after the first that day.
Mm-hmm.
Unless that's somebody giving an update in relation to me. However, I'm actually reading mobile phone footage. I'm trying to think what that means as well.
We've not heard from Detective Superintendent Campbell yet, so it may be that he'll be in a position to give us more information. But I just wanted to ask you whether you remembered being at that briefing, but you don't.
No, I know.
Now, looking at what it says there, have viewed the mobile phone footage, Do you remember at some point viewing mobile phone footage?
No, but I remember I'm sure there was an action to go and try and recover a mobile phone from a witness who may have recorded it.
Can I show you some mobile phone footage that we have?
Yes.
And you can tell me if it's something you've viewed before. So this is, we've heard evidence about this before. It's from a lady called Ashley Wise. And it's Snapchat footage. So the app Snapchat was used to record some images. And what we'll do is I'll just play you, it's very short. I'll play you a little bit of that. And then I'll ask you some questions. That's lovely, thank you. Did you have a chance to see that on the screen?
Yes.
You'll see it's very short,
Yes.
the Snapchat footage. Have you seen that footage before?
I think I've only seen that. Well, I think I've seen that on the TV. Has that been on?
It's been on
TV?
the television, yes.
Yes.
It was used in the first hearing we had,
Yep.
and I think it was on the television.
Yes, I've never watched it during evidence, but I'm sure I've seen that on the telly.
And do you remember if you've ever watched that before?
No, I don't remember watching that before, but Ashley Wise was someone whose name was in my book.
Exactly.
So
So if we could go back to the briefing notes, please, the PS 00784, page 2, line 5. So where it appears to say DS Dursley have viewed the mobile phone footage which showed deceased in leg restraints but does not show any confrontation or baton strike. Insofar as that appears to attribute that to you, that's not anything you remember doing.
I don't remember that.
Okay, thank you. Can I ask you about briefing notes? In May 2015, whose decision was it to take a view on how the officers were to be briefed, what they were to be briefed about, that sort of thing? Whose decision would that be to have a briefing and what the content of the briefing would be?
It depends what you mean by a briefing, because a briefing in general would mean sit down, people round the table, right, this is the story, you bring everybody up to speed, which a general briefing for a major incident, you know, like day 2, day 3, day 4, that's what would happen morning and potentially at night. But certainly my involvement on that day 1, it wasn't a case of a sit down where everyone would sit and chat. Briefings are fast, they're on the move, and they're happening quite quickly, so it's not a briefing as in a traditional sense of where you sit down and share information.
When you say they're on the move, describe how they are conducted.
When I say on the move, they could be done by telephone, they could be done at different locations in a police station, where a briefing for me, a traditional briefing is in either a muster room or a conference room where you sit down and you actually sit and, you know, there is a chair and someone allocated to take control of that and give the updates and information.
And people can take notes and things.
Yes.
And then the other briefing, which is on the phone maybe, is that a less formal briefing?
Yes.
Is that what you were talking about yesterday when you said you updated, I think it was D.I. Robson, you talked about an update and I said, is that the same as a briefing?
It's not, that's just sharing information, but that's what you do at a briefing, but it's just a slightly different.
Just slightly different?
Yeah, slightly different for me.
When you have the more formal briefing and people are in a muster room, say, are notes prepared that allows someone to deliver the briefing to officers?
It depends what type of case it is, because certainly for major investigations, I'm not part of the major investigation team, and I never have been. However, I do know that the process for them is formal briefings, and I'm pretty sure that they are recorded and recorded on a Holmes computer system. Now, in terms of briefings where I work, I'll deliver a briefing and I will just do that myself from not necessarily notes. I'll just prepare that from memory or what I know that I need to get done.
So Could it be from notes from your daybook or your
Could
notebook?
be, or could be statements I've got or emails I have, and then I'll go in and deliver a briefing at that point.
But not necessarily sort of prepared notes that, like not a lecture, but a sort of presentation or
No,
nothing like
not
that?
to that extent. Not to that extent.
How do you ensure in the sort of work that you do that there is consistency amongst briefings that are given between different officers?
Could you just go and say that again for me?
If you say deliver a briefing to a certain group of officers,
Yeah.
but then you realise that not everyone was present and you need to deliver another briefing to a different set of officers, how do you ensure that there's consistency?
You would just try to cover the same information. Now, what you don't want to do is be briefing all day, and see the 10 different people, so you would try and capture everyone at the same time. But if you've got someone who's going to be coming on at that inquiry, you'll be looking to bring them up to speed and brief them when they arrive.
So you're the point of sort of contact for people and the point of knowledge that delivers the briefing, and it all comes from you?
Not for this investigation, but...
No, not for this,
yes,
but just
in
generally.
In general, yes, it would be, yeah.
Would it be difficult to incorporate some sort of written record of briefings in an investigation of this sort that could be delivered to officers, show consistency, that type of thing?
I think that would be... Sounds great, but I think that would be very hard to do, because when these things are happening, it's so fast paced, and to be able to keep on top of that and then recordings, it's crucial. Look at my notes, If you're getting the better quality notes, it makes it so much easier further down the line. You want to get that done, but at the same time, you also can't spend your time constantly writing in your book, because you've got to get stuff done.
You talked yesterday about things moving at a quick pace, fast moving.
Yes.
Does that inhibit the ability of you to write good notes?
Yes, it did.
Yeah. If we look at these briefing notes again, towards the bottom of that page, we can maybe move up. We then see briefing 9:51. Sorry, come back. Thank you. Briefing 9:15, 5th of May 2015. So this appears to be a document where, again, another briefing note appears, chaired this time by DCI Hardy, and it says, PERC are the primary investigators and we work under their instruction as decided by Dave Green, the Senior Procurator. There's no reference to you having been involved at that briefing that day. Can we move further up, please? Because there's another reference at the bottom, which is from the 6th of May. Keep going, sorry. It's towards the end. See at the end, briefing 8 o'clock in the morning, 6th of May, and then it says no briefing. In what circumstances would you be expecting to see a reference that says no briefing?
It depends if maybe the day before, because normally in your briefing you're setting out your actions or what priorities are for that next day. It may have been that the day previous to set out actions that we'll cover for 2 days, and the agreement is we'll regroup again on the morning of, say, the 7th.
Right. Thank you. Could we go back to paragraph 42 of your inquiry statement, please? I'm finished with the briefing notes. So paragraph 42, this refers back to the note in your daybook that we touched on yesterday. This is the 66th page. And it says, Zahid spoke to him, racist, And you see, I'm looking at that note, and that's the officers who were speaking to Colette Bell. That's information that Zaid Saeed has been speaking to him. It's an assumption maybe that Zaid Saeed has been racist. And I just wanted to, I said yesterday we'd come back to this paragraph, and
Yes.
I just want to ask you about this. What was it that gave you a basis for assuming that Mr. Saeed had been racist, which is what you seem to be suggesting here
Yeah.
in paragraph 42?
Purely because it's next to his name.
Just the little dash,
Yeah.
racist.
Zahid Saeed, and then there's an arrow, brass, spoke to him, dash, racist, close bracket. So
Let's just look at that on the screen so everyone can follow what you're referring to. And I think this is on the right-hand side towards the top of this page. And it says Zaid, and the arrow, and then the brackets next to it, does it say spoke to him?
practice spoke to him, yeah, dash, racist.
Dash racist. And there's no other explanation or detail there about what that meant.
No.
And in paragraph 42, you seem to be suggesting or assuming that Mr. Zaid had been racist. That's an assumption on your part. Yeah. Do you remember anything about this?
No.
Why you wrote that?
No, because when I looked at that note, I thought, what is that? And then I goes, it's next to Zahid Saeed. And then I actually thought I could do with looking at the statement noted from Colette Bell, because that should cover that information if that's correct. But obviously I've not got access to any of these statements, never seen these statements, so I didn't do that bit.
So you think this might be something from Colette Bell?
Yeah, but that's the officers that have been speaking to Colette Bell have given me an update at that time.
Right. Is it possible that Mr. Saeed was suggesting that somebody had been racist towards him?
Somebody had been racist towards Mr.
Saeed?
That is totally possible. It's totally possible because I don't know what the content of that is.
All right. Can I ask you to look at paragraph in your inquiry statement 197 now, please? And you say here, effectively hate crimes may have slipped through the net in the past, like other things, not because of colour or anything like that, it's because mistakes happen. Now with hate crime there's a focus, so these crimes don't slip through the net. It's focused effectively is how I would describe it. I think it's given special attention because of a change in the times, and we have to make sure we fully support minority groups and not let people feel they are not trusted or believed, and in these crimes we can't make mistakes. It's been a long time since we started doing that. I don't remember anything happening or why this changed. And I'd just like to ask you some more questions about that paragraph. When you mention the word special attention, I wondered what you meant by that. So that's roughly halfway down the paragraph. You say, I think it's given special attention.
There is what I mean by that is on the inspector's logs that are run in our division, there is a section purely for hate-related crime. So if there is a hate-related incident reported, that would be included on the log, and it remains in it until it is resolved and reviewed by an officer that's to ensure that it's been fully investigated.
And for people listening, can you explain to them what you mean by a hate crime?
A crime which someone reports where they or someone else perceives that they have been the victim of an offence, and it relates to either race, religion, gender, whatever the circumstances are. So, you know, shouting and swearing at someone because of their ethnicity or anything like that would be classified as a hate crime.
So one of their particular characteristics.
That's right, yes.
And you also talk about a change in the times. Can you just explain what you mean by that?
Can I just read that sentence again?
So
Yeah.
at the end you say, I've lost it. It's the same, just after special attention, because of a change in the times. So it's in the middle.
Things are getting better, you know. The world for me is getting a better place than what it was when, you know, I was born in the late 70s, into the early 80s, into the 90s, when, you know, people did have different views. But my perception is that things are getting better nowadays.
When you comment on making sure that you support minority groups and not let people feel they are not trusted or believed, was that something that was an issue that minority groups felt they couldn't trust or believe in the police? Was that something you were conscious of?
I think it's just important to make sure that minority groups are happy to come forward and speak to the police, you know, and they trust that we're going to take action on what they're reporting.
And when you've said at the top, effectively hate crimes may have slipped through the net in the past, like other things, not because of colour or anything like that, it's because mistakes happen. What did you mean by that?
What I'm saying is, in the past, well, sometimes in the police, you know, things are missed, you know, don't get done effectively. What I've said is that that may have happened in the past in relation to hate crimes, but now there's the audit and check in place that shouldn't be happening. They shouldn't be making mistakes and shouldn't be things missed.
So sometimes mistakes happen,
Yep.
but other times it may be that things happen because they are hate crimes.
Yes.
Can I ask you about paragraph 11 now, please, of your inquiry statement? And here you were talking about training, and you were asked about equality and diversity training. And at paragraph 11, you say you can go on the intranet, and we've heard that there's a Police Scotland intranet, and identify what training is available and take on extra work. The keen officers do this. You don't have to do it outside police hours. There might be some officers who do it while they're on duty. And I'm interested in finding out what you mean about extra work.
I've described them as keen officers as well. That's maybe not the best description, but you get some officers who are really enthusiastic, want to develop, want to learn other skills, want to go into different areas, and you know they'll do that extra work, which might not be required of everyone. It's not a requirement, it's not a must do, but they want to do it because they want to develop, which is brilliant. But it's not. You don't always have to do that.
What you've mentioned the keen officers, is that because they want to advance themselves in some way?
That's how I would describe somebody as who's got a drive and wants to do things.
Right. Is keen officers a bit of a derogatory term? Is it, or is it not with that connotation attached?
It's just not very professional when I read it back.
And then we've heard that sometimes officers find it difficult to read guidance and information and SOPs, for example, on the intranet and through their emails when they're so busy during the day. And is that an ongoing problem for officers?
Yes.
And you said that they don't have to do it outside police hours. If they did do it outside police hours, are they paid for that?
I don't think they will be. Some of them sometimes do extra Moodle, you know. Sometimes I've sat and you work on maybe an hour or two and just to get it done to make sure you're doing that. You won't necessarily do that. However, at the same time, we are trying to give officers time to do these Moodle courses, but again, it's not easy to fit it in. You've got to be honest and say it's not.
We heard some evidence, and we may hear more evidence about training, but that Police Scotland have rolled out a Moodle course, which can be done online
Yes.
on the computer,
Yes.
and apparently it's now compulsory. Is that what you're referring to when you refer
Is that
to
in relation to the diversity Moodle course?
equality and diversity?
Yes, that's right, yes.
Is that right? And as well as maybe not having enough hours in the day at work, what about things like shifts? Does shift patterns impact on the ability of officers to engage with training that might be available?
I'm actually the opposite to that. If you're on the shift and you've got a potential, doesn't happen a lot, on a say a night shift on a particular night, you could get the chance to do your Moodle training when you're on the shifts. And that's what's actually good about Moodle training, in that you can do it. There's flexibility. You can start it, you can stop it, you can come back to it.
Mm-hmm. I mean, on an ordinary working day, if there is such a thing in the police service, how much time and energy do officers have to fit in additional reading or exploring the intranet?
It's really hard because response officers at the moment are going from job to job to job. They're very busy, and getting that time is not easy. Sometimes there are crossover in shifts patterns, so you've got extra officers on. Now that is an opportunity, but a lot of times they're doing custody reports, dealing with people that are in custody, but that is a time when there is slightly more staff and it gives them a chance during that time.
Can I ask you to look at paragraph 9, please, of your inquiry statement? You say here it's the line manager who's in charge of my training. It's the inspector above me. Over a long period of time, you've got your line manager who's responsible. Some people change roles and do additional training. I've had various managers over the years because it changes as a new person comes. They'll confirm what training I've had. They'll suggest things, and I'll volunteer to go and do it. And then at paragraph 10, if we just move down a little, I was the line manager for Callum Clayton and Wayne Parker. I was looking to make sure that they were getting the training when they could. So does that mean that you're in charge of training of officers that you're the line manager for?
So if I'm the line manager and I would go to a new department, what I would do is I would look at that staff to see what training they've had to make sure that they are trained for the roles that they're in. Like I'm in charge of sexual offences just now, so I will make sure that all the officers are trained appropriately as sexual offences officers to go and do that job.
And as part of that, do you also have to make sure that they've done training in diversity?
Not until lately.
Not until the recent Moodle?
Yeah, the recent one, because that's been shared, and there's an instruction that for completion rate, it's got to be 100% completion rate for that.
Right. And that's a new thing, is it?
That late last year that come out.
And so that's been absorbed by you into your role now?
Yes.
In relation to the officers working beneath you?
Yes.
In 2015, what was the position?
Well, in preparation for that, being interviewed, I went and checked my records, and effectively I hadn't had formal training that I could remember and since the date that's in my statement. So I don't remember regular training in relation to diversity issues.
Can we look at paragraph 12, please? I think you say there that you've not proactively read anything additional in relation to equality and diversity. And was that, apart from the recent Moodle changes, was that the position really throughout your service?
Yes.
And was that the same for officers who were, you were the line manager in relation to those officers?
I can't remember asking officers to go and proactively look at training in relation to diversity. No, I can't.
And so if, as a line manager, you weren't looking up diversity and you weren't asking them to look it up, were you aware of many of the officers that you had under your management going away and researching diversity themselves?
I don't remember that. They may have done, but I don't remember them doing that.
And you've talked today about, you know, different views and how society's changed and it's getting better now. When you talked about different views before in the 70s and things like that, what were you referring to?
Just in general, you know, society in general, where, you know, you look at things like football matches, chants, things that were said, you know, the football players coming to Scotland and being racially abused, it's terrible, you know. But things are getting better. It still happens, but for me, it's moved on. It is moving on. Things are getting better, and people are challenging it.
I'm not sure football
Sorry.
is the best
I know,
example of change, but after the recent
No.
publicity. But you know, in other areas, maybe there's been bigger levels of
Yes.
change from that. Can I ask you to look at paragraph 39 of your inquiry statement? And this is where you were asked about the investigation. And you say you kept an open mind about the investigation. I don't know what caused the death of Mr. Bio. I wanted to speak to people to find out as much information as I could to understand what happened. It is a hypothesis that criminal police actions may have caused the death or something that he's taken. It's a medical matter, or there's something that happened in the lead up to it that caused it. And in the absence of specific information, we don't know what caused it. And I think yesterday I asked you about the idea of you having an open mind about all the different hypotheses and possibilities of what may have caused Mr. Bio's death. And you said that you had kept that open mind. And you're nodding.
Yes, sorry.
And then at 41, you say, I didn't consider race being a factor in Sheku Bio's death. And I just wondered about reconciling those two statements. On the one hand, keeping an open mind about what would appear to be all the possibilities, and on the other, saying that you didn't consider race being a factor in his death.
So I think a better line would be, I didn't see anything on that day or get reported to me anything that involved, that I thought straight away was this incident involved race.
Right. So it wasn't that you didn't consider it, but you didn't see anything to support it at that time.
At that point, you know, there was nothing that I can think was directly involved in Mr. Bio's death that involved race.
Right. Thank you. Can I ask you about that, you not seeing anything on that day? At paragraph 12, we've looked at, you've talked very frankly about the training, that wasn't something that you'd proactively gone and read. You hadn't had a lot of training in diversity over your service at that stage. At paragraph 191, you'd said you don't remember doing anything in terms of race training when you joined the police. You did talk about an impactful 2-day training course at 192 involving talking to people from different backgrounds, but you said that was about 20 years ago, almost 20 years ago. And at 194, you talk about not having had any training relating to unconscious bias. Looking back now to the 3rd of May 2015, how do you think if I can call it the lack of training on race-related issues, what impact do you think that had on your ability to see issues on the 3rd of May that might have had a factor in his death, Mr. Bio's?
I think a better line would be, I didn't see anything on that day or get reported to me anything that involved race. So I think a better line would be, I didn't see anything on that day or get reported to me anything that involved race. I'd like to think, although the police we've not done training since 2003, even think my personal life and the police in general, that if I had seen something or aware of something, I would challenge it. I wouldn't let that go. You know, if there had been training, yeah, that would have been good. I might have been able to see something potentially I've not seen or no recognised. But the truth is, we didn't have the additional training.
What sort of thing would you have been looking for if
Well,
you'd, to recognise the fact there was maybe some race issue?
I'd be looking for, well, in terms of the police officers and their reaction and how they were dealing with this.
Just information that would have come to your knowledge as part of the
You
investigation.
know, if anyone was saying anything, in terms of the officers that I found was derogatory, or any comments in relation to what had taken place, that's the type of stuff that I would look for, and you would challenge if you were aware of that.
So something overt or
Yes.
obvious,
Yes.
something said,
Yes.
maybe particular language used,
Yes.
that type of thing. So would you have felt comfortable recognising that as race-related
Yes.
on the 3rd of May?
Yes.
What about more subtle, covert elements, or would there have been any part of the investigation that would have looked at that?
Not by me at that point. No. Have I missed something? Possibly if there's been something there, but I've not seen anything with that.
Can I ask you about paragraph 198, please? So we'll see that on the screen. Overall, Sheku Bayo's race played no role in my actions on that day. I wouldn't want to speak about others, but for me personally, I was aware a man had died in police custody who was black. You don't want the public thinking that he died because he was black. I don't think the colour of Mr. Bayo had anything to do with the response. I would hate for others to think this had an effect on the investigation. I did think about it, but I wouldn't want the public thinking I was doing anything different. On the day, we're on autopilot and I'm dealing with what's in front of me. I'd like to ask you some questions about that. When you say there that you didn't want the public to think that race was a factor in how Mr. Bayo had been treated, when did you first start to think that you didn't want the public to think that?
That's a statement I made in August last year when I was asked. I can just say that I would hate for the public to think that me as a police officer or the team that I'm working with would have done anything different on that day because Mr. Bayo was black.
Do you feel you've been in the service since 1996?
Yes.
And your career has been with the police.
Yes.
Do you feel protective towards the police service? Or?
Yes. I'm a police officer. I really like it, and I enjoy being a police officer.
And it means something to you that the public respect the police and believe in the work that they're doing.
Yes.
Did you feel on the 3rd of May defensive or protective towards the officers in relation to the events?
No, I felt for the officers. They've been involved in something horrific, but at the same time, I didn't know actually what had happened. So you've got to actually think, right, let's just deal with what was happened.
And was it because you were a police officer that you felt for the officers who'd been involved? Or do you normally feel...
Well, I felt that day, that could have been I could have been first at that call. Anybody could have been sent to that, and you just think, position to be in, and for them to be in. So yeah, I did think it was really hard.
And you didn't want the public to think it was anything to do with Mr. Bio being black.
I would hate if any of the police officers done anything different that day because of somebody's because he was black. You know, it would just be totally wrong.
And it would be difficult for you as a police officer if that was the case?
Yes, it would be.
How would it be difficult for you?
Well, if somebody did do something on that day because of the fact that Mr. Bow was black, you know, you would want to get that. You would want to get that dealt with. And you would want to get that person, you know. But and that's why I would hate if that was the case, because then the criticism comes on the police as well as opposed to an individual. So when you get a police officer doing something, it makes you cringe inside, and you're just like, how, you know, has that happened there?
And all officers would feel that.
Well, I certainly do.
Yeah.
But the people that I'm friends with in the police, I believe are like me.
Do you think those feelings in May 2015 might have had an impact on your objectivity and your ability to investigate?
No, because although you know, I'm saying I'm a police officer and I love the police and everything like that, I've also investigated police officers. I also know there's not good police officers, so you know, that's why I'm saying you keep an open mind, and if there's something that they've done that was wrong, I'd be more than happy to arrest a police officer. You know, if the circumstances dictated, I would do that.
So if you had concerns about the actions of an officer, that maybe they were affected by racial discrimination, would you hesitate to investigate and deal with that officer appropriately because of your feelings that you've described, or would you not hesitate?
It actually make me more determined to give them the jail or lock them up, or, you know, deal with it properly.
Thank you. Can I ask you to look at paragraph 201? I've never seen discriminatory behaviour by police officers. I'm not aware of any racist views of police officers. I've never heard any racist jokes or racist comments by police at any time. And you've been in the service for a long time. You've worked with many officers, senior and junior to you in terms of rank. You've no doubt spent a lot of time in canteens and even perhaps socialising with officers.
Yes.
There's been quite a lot of media interest recently in relation to WhatsApp messages and text messages in relation to other police forces. You've never seen any discriminatory behaviour in all of those years by any police officers?
I've never been seen, or in terms of racist jokes, no. No.
What about discriminatory behaviour, not just racist jokes?
Depends what you mean by discriminated behaviour, I suppose. You know, is there over a period of time, you know, things being said in a canteen when I joined in the mid-90s to what you would say now? Yes. Okay. In terms of race, no. You know, is there? I'm just trying to think back to when I was young. I was only 17 as a cadet in 1995. You know, it's completely different days. Is there anything I could think about now going, well, that was, I can't put my finger on anything that I could define to you just now, but things have changed.
The chair has a statement, and we'll be hearing evidence from this witness later in the hearing, who does say that there were inappropriate jokes at times. inappropriate racist jokes at times, jokes about nationalities. They might be telling us, you know, there's often jokes about, many of us will recall jokes about the Englishman, the Scottishman and the Irishman, things like that. Are these the types of jokes that you may have heard in the past?
Yeah, there is jokes like that in the past. But again, things like that have gone for me, you know, that's a time ago.
Do you think more junior officers will hide that type of comment from someone such as yourself who's an inspector now?
I'd like to think they're not doing that. You know, especially the younger ones, actually. You know what? Especially the younger officers, they're brought up in a different time, where I think they're better.
So it's maybe the older officers that are hiding the comments.
I'm not saying that at all, but I think younger officers coming through are much more aware nowadays, and you know what? The youth society get a bit of a hard time at times, but I actually think they're not as bad as we think.
Given what you've said earlier today, if you had seen behaviour that was discriminatory, racist, for example, are you confident that you would recognise that, even though you've not had
I'd like to think I would. I'd like to think I would.
Could you give me a moment, please? Thank you very much.
Are there any Rule 9 applications? Ms Mitchell. Detective Inspector, I wonder if you would withdraw to the witness room while I hear a submission.
I forgot about the PAL.
Yes, Ms Mitchell. Yes, Ms Mitchell.
Touching on the last point first in relation to the issue of discrimination, the witness was asked about the issue of discrimination, and he says that it depended what you meant by discrimination. And what I was wanting to test with him to see whether or not he was aware of other types of discrimination, such as gender discrimination within the police force, and whether or not he was aware of that type of discrimination, sexual comments, things of that nature. So that's really just a follow-up question. Moving back to earlier matters, I'm obliged to my learned friend for covering the issue of consent very thoroughly, but one issue I think that arises is the consent in relation to seizing a scene, or what was described as a crime scene, and the issue of consent. And the inquiry might remember that when we were listening to Mr. Saeed Senior, he came back to the police station and basically said, we want back into our house. And what I would like to explore with the witness is, what did he consider was the basis once they had seized it? Could consent be revoked? And were they entitled to say, we would just like back into our house? So to explore with the witness what he thought the legal status was after it was seized for that reason. The next matter arises from his first PERC statement, PERC 00136. And this was in our application, our Rule 9. I spoke to my learned friend about it, and I think she made a decision based on the fact that the witness could not remember the telephone conversation he had with Saeed. so she didn't pursue this matter further. However, I would respectfully submit that I should be able to ask questions about this, because in his statement, he speaks of explaining to police officers to give Colette the death notice, and then he said, "I thereafter made telephone contact with witness Zaid Said on his mobile telephone to confirm his welfare and current location. I explained to witness Said that we were concerned for his friend, brackets now deceased, and that the police required to speak to him." And what I'd like to explore with the witness was, in the face of already having instructed officers to give the death notice to Colette, why he would tell the witness Said that they were concerned for his friend when they already knew he was dead. Moving then on to the issue of police contact, this is something that comes about as a result of a response to a question he was asked. At page 88 of yesterday's transcript, he was talking about how he was becoming increasingly concerned that the family had to be given some notice. And he said, "I don't know when I found out about the sister, but I remember thinking, we've got to get information out there in relation to, well, the police contact and the confirmation of his death." And what I would like to explore with the witness was, what was the urgency for him of getting the information out in relation to police contact? And finally, in relation to, again, an issue arising in relation to consent of Zahid's family, and I can put that in at the same point, he said at the end of his evidence that one of the things that he would perhaps now consider to do is go back and check with his officers in relation to the issue of consent. And what I was wanting to ask him was, he explains that the issues that were raised by the family in respect of the police, the fact that one of the members of their family was quadriplegic, that one was a nursing mother, the child had had an operation, those factors was, he says, when was asked, was any of that shared with you by the officers, he says, "I don't remember anything to do with that." And what I would like to explore was, should the officers have contacted him and made him aware of that? Is that something that if those police officers were faced with people who said, "No, we're not leaving our house," is that something he would have expected to be brought back to his attention? Those are my questions.
Thank you. Well, I'll let John to consider these submissions.
There's one further part I should add. Sorry, I'm obliged. I asked for a reference to be given to me. When he speaks of discrimination, there was one issue I'd like to raise with him, and that is the question of stereotyping of racial groups. The inquiry will come to hear about people being described in certain ways by one of his colleagues, Mr. Robson, and I was going to ask this witness whether he recognised that as being stereotyping a group of people.
Thank you.
And that's at paragraph 33 and 34 of Mr. Robson's statement. I'm obliged.
Ms Mitchell raised a number of points. I have previously taken the view that the exploration of sexual discrimination goes out with the terms of reference. I shall not permit that. It seems to me that the issues of consent and withdrawal of consent have been comprehensively explored with this witness and are likely to be explored again later. So I shall not permit any further questioning on that. I shall allow Ms Mitchell to ask questions in relation to this witness's telephone conversation with Said. I do not consider it that further exploration of this witness's position in relation to the death message, which again has been thoroughly explored, would assist me. So I shall not permit any further questioning there. As to the proposal to put to this witness the evidence of Chief Inspector Robson at paragraphs 33 and 34 of his inquiry statement, counsel to the inquiry has already alluded to this, to evidence to come. Mr Robson will be giving evidence today, so I do not think I'd be assisted by exploration of these issues with this witness. So I shall allow questioning in relation to the telephone conversation with Said only. Can we have the witness back, please? Inspector Dursley, Miss Mitchell, who represents the Shekubayev families, will ask you a few questions.
Obliged. I wonder if we could have up on the screen perk statements 00136. And if we go to the second page of that. Now, Inspector Dursley, this is a statement that you gave, that you took yourself on the 4th May 2015 at 11 a.m, and we've seen that before in the inquiry. Could I ask you to look in particular about the third paragraph there that starts about 10:45 hours? And do we see there in that paragraph of the evidence that you've already given that you, in effect, told officers to pass on the death notice?
Yes.
In the next paragraph, you talk of making contact with the witness Zaid Said. Now, we'd heard from you that this was an important thing that you wanted to do, and you explained to us why that was. Can you repeat that for us just now, why it was important?
It was important because Zaid Said had been in the company of Mr Bayou that morning, because that was the information we'd got from Colette Bell, and he would have been one of the last people that had been with him that morning. So he was important in relation to trying to fill in the timeline of what had happened.
So when you spoke to him, you say you can't remember this at all?
No.
I'd like to explore with you this. You said that this is on the next day, and obviously working as a aide memoir, you said that you wanted to confirm his welfare. Might you be able to tell us anything about that?
From recollection, the first information I got from the officers, that there had been some sort of altercation between Mr Bayou and Zaid Said, so make sure he's okay is one of the first things you would look to do.
And his current location, presumably that's quite self-explanatory?
Yes, where he was.
And the next thing, if I can ask you to read out the next sentence.
I explained to witness Said that we were concerned for his friend, brackets now deceased, and that the police required to speak to him.
Now, by this time you, of course, knew that Mr Bayou was dead.
No, we knew someone was dead, but not Mr Bayou.
You were confident enough to give his partner a death notice?
That was at 10:45 after I got the information. In fact, sorry, that was after. Yeah, you're right. Apologies, timing's wrong. So Yes, we told Colette Bell by that point, yes.
Yeah, so you were confident enough to pass the death message on to Colette Bell, and you knew that Mr. Said had been involved in an altercation with Mr. Bayo earlier. Why did you tell Zaid Said that you were concerned for his friend when you already knew he was dead?
We still never had formal identification of Mr. Bayo at that stage. I believed it was him, but there was not certainty, so that death message that was passed to Miss Bell was that a male was dead. We believed it was Mr. Bayo, but we didn't have certainty for that.
So why did you tell Mr. Zaid that you were concerned for his friend?
Because we were still concerned for his friend. Although I believed it was him, there were still concerns.
So I understand what you're thinking. Why did you tell Zaid that?
Because we were looking to speak to him about the circumstances we had, and we were looking to speak to him in relation to what had occurred.
But it wasn't correct in the sense that you already believed that Mr. Shikabayo was dead.
Yeah, but we didn't have certainty for that at that point.
No further questions.
Detective Inspector Dursley, thank you very much for coming to give evidence to the inquiry. We're going to rise briefly in order that the next witness can be introduced, and you'll then be free to go. Good morning, Chief Inspector Robson. Would you raise your hand and take the words of the oath after me, please? I swear by Almighty God
I swear by Almighty God
that I will tell the truth,
that I will tell the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the
and
truth.
nothing but the truth.
Ms. Graeme.
Good morning.
Morning.
You are Colin Robson.
That's correct.
What age are you?
I am 43.
And your rank is currently Chief Inspector?
That's correct.
In 2015, you What rank were you at that stage?
I was a detective inspector.
Detective inspector. And how many years service do you have?
I've got 24 years, 25 years this year.
Right. So in 2015, I think you had 17 years service. Is
That's
that
correct.
correct? And you have also spent some of your time with the police in the professional standards department.
That's correct.
And you did that for about 2.5 years,
Yes.
is that right? And do you want to explain briefly your current role with the police?
I'm currently part of it's a project. It's a Policing in a Digital World programme that looks in relation to delivering the cyber strategy for Police Scotland and partners.
Let me just tell you what's in front of you. There should be a folder, a blue folder.
Yep.
And what we've done is we've got hard copies of your various statements, and I'm going to go through those with you, check we've got them. But you're very free to look at them or consider them if you prefer. When I ask for a particular paragraph to come up, it'll come up on the screen in front of you. But if there's something else around or another area you want me to look at, feel free to tell me and we can have that brought up on the screen as well.
Thank
In addition, I think there should be a spreadsheet, which is called a combined audio and video spreadsheet. It's A3.
Yep.
Is it just to your left?
It is,
That's
yes.
it. And I'll talk you through that when we come to it. But you can use that as well and refer to it as you wish. Now, as well as your statements, we've also been given a document which should be at the rear of that blue folder, which covers your rank, your postings, and your training records. Do you have a copy of that?
I do,
there?
yes.
And that's up to date, and we've been given copies of that. So if you wanted to refer to that at any time,
Okay.
you've got a copy there at your disposal. Let's look first of all at the first operational statement that you prepared. And that should be the first one in the blue folder for you. It's PS 00280. And if you just move down the screen slightly, we'll see that this was prepared on the 4th of May 2015 at 13:30 in Kirkcaldy. And I think you prepared this yourself.
I did, yes.
And I think in your most recent inquiry statement, you say that you did your best when you prepared this to give a true and accurate account of your involvement in the events on the 3rd of May.
That's correct.
Is that correct? And then can we look at PERC 00223? And this is another statement by you. And slightly later, on the 2nd of June 2015 at 9:40, and it was a statement given to PERC. And if we can just move down the screen a little, we'll see that it was taken by DSI Keith Harrower in the presence of investigator Ross Stewart. They're both from PERC, and it was taken at Kirkcaldy Police Office.
That's correct.
Now, in paragraph 44 of your inquiry statement, you say at the beginning of this statement there was a slight anomaly about care positioning or something. We'll come back to
Okay.
that in due course. So, but subject to that anomaly that you've mentioned later, you did your best to be true and accurate in this statement as well.
That's correct. I think it was a car positioning.
Oh, car,
I
yes.
think it was car,
That's my typing. Thank you. Car positioning, not care. And I think at paragraph 45 of your inquiry statement, you say, if in the event of a discrepancy between your inquiry statements, your operational statement, and or your PERC statement, you would prefer the PERC one because they compared my original and asked me addendum or additional questions on that. And you're happy with the PERC statement because it has greater detail in it.
That's correct.
And that's the statement that we see on the screen at the
Yes.
moment. Thank you. Let's then look at PERC 00224. And this is a statement dated the 24th of November, which we'll see, and there we are, 24th of November 2015 at 8 in the morning. And again, it's a self-statement, so does that mean you've prepared this yourself?
Yes, I think it was maybe supplementaries from the original statement that I was asked to provide.
Yeah. This is in November
Yes.
of 2015, and this was prepared at Divisional HQ in Glenrothes.
That's correct.
And can you explain why you prepared this statement? It's very brief.
Yeah, I think it came from, and it was as part of the investigation, PSD became the conduit between PERC and Police Scotland, that I was contacted by somebody from Professional Standards Department, again just from an ask or an action from PERC to clarify a certain part of my statement.
All right, thank you very much. And again, you did your best to be true and accurate in your statement on this date.
That's correct.
Then let's look at your first inquiry statement, please. That's SBPI 00133. Now, I think originally you were spoken to by someone in the inquiry team, and a statement was taken from you on Wednesday the 23rd of March last year. And this was 30 pages long. And if you can look through your hard copy, you'll see that you've actually signed it on every page. And just so that people understand, you're given the opportunity, your statement's prepared, it's returned to you, and then you're given the chance to read through it and make sure if there's any changes you want to make, or alterations, or deletions, additions, and then you can sign every page. And I think normally it's done digitally.
Yeah, that's correct.
And that's what happened with this statement.
Yes.
And if we look at the final page, please, it's we see it's 126 paragraphs long, and your signature is on this page on the 31st of May of last year. So although it was taken in March, it was signed by you on the 31st of May last year. And although we can't see you'll see on the screen that your signature is redacted. And if we look at paragraph 126, it says, I believe the facts stated in this witness statement are true. I understand that this statement may form part of the evidence before the inquiry and be published on the inquiry's website. And you understood that when you signed it?
I did, yes.
Thank you. And then can we look at your second inquiry statement, which is SBPI 00251. And this was taken from you on Wednesday the 4th of October and Wednesday the 9th of November last year.
That's correct.
So it was 2 occasions that you were spoken to. And it's 60 pages long. And if we go to the final page, we can see, although it's redacted, that you've signed that page, and in fact you've signed all the pages again of this statement.
Yes.
And it was signed by you on the 27th of January this year.
That's correct.
And the last paragraph on this second inquiry statement is 283, and it's in exactly the same terms as the previous one. So I believe the facts stated in this witness statement are true. I understand that this statement may form part of the evidence before the inquiry and be published on the inquiry's website. And again, you understood that when you signed the statement.
I did, yes.
Thank you. And so I think in paragraph 46 of your inquiry statement, you said that you've endeavoured with all your statements to be true and accurate in what you've said.
I have, yes.
Thank you. And I think in paragraphs 44 to 47 of your inquiry statement, you have given a detailed explanation about the circumstances surrounding giving the statements in 2015, when they were both written by you alone and also given to PERC.
That's correct, yes.
Lovely. I would like to start by asking you some questions about the 3rd of May 2015. And let's go first of all to SBPI 00133, please. And that, you'll see it's come up on the screen. This is your first statement that you gave in March of last year. So it's the first inquiry statement. And if we look please at paragraphs 79 and then 80. And if we can have both of them on the screen, that's fantastic. And it says, I've been referred to my PERC statement, and then you quote, I was generally happy, I was aware of the circumstances, and I didn't require any further information from her at that stage. However, during the journey, she came out with a purely spontaneous... Oh, let me just... Sorry, I think I'm on the wrong statement. After all that, I think it was SBPI. Let me just check before that can be taken off the screen for a moment. Besley's plans. Yes, I'm on the wrong statement. It's the second inquiry statement I'm looking for. And so that is SBPI 00251. We'll come on to that earlier paragraph later today. But first of all, let's have paragraphs 79 and 80 of your second inquiry statement. And this one reads, I was temp DI from May 2014, so I'd been SIO for pretty much the best part of a year. During that time, I did an awareness course to equip me in the absence of the full course. I'd done various seminars, conferences, etc. There's a shadowing period where you do the role but have advice and guidance. I was SIO for the whole of Fife that day. I didn't ordinarily work out there, but no doubt the staff that I was overseeing that day from a crime management perspective were in Kirkcaldy, so I started there. And again, there is a process to the day in terms of morning meetings, overseeing others, as I say, incidents and crimes, providing guidance that's supervisory oversight from an investigative perspective. I was providing advice and guidance for all staff on duty that day. I was SIO at the start of my shift, so I oversaw other incidents and crimes. So I want to explore these paragraphs with you, if I may. So I'd like to talk about primarily the 3rd of May 2015. And I think at that date you've said you'd been a temporary DI since May of 2014.
That's correct.
And so that was roughly a year you'd been in the role. Was that as a temporary role but for around a year?
Yes.
And had you been doing it full time for that year?
I had, yes.
And you say that you'd done an awareness course in the absence of the full course. Can you explain what you mean by that?
So again, obviously, performing that role ordinarily, you would then be put forward to carry out the senior investigators course at the college. Obviously, in terms of the demand and the timing, you're given an awareness course to best equip you to carry out that role in the interim period.
Mm-hmm. Is there a difference between the awareness course and the full course?
I think obviously the full course would be more comprehensive. So this was basically covering the kind of basic principles of the role of SIO, appreciating that obviously I had significant crime management experience prior to conducting that role. And
was that experience of crime management from your year as a temporary DI or just generally in your service?
Pretty much for the 14 years prior to that in various roles within crime management and investigations.
Do you want to tell us what those roles were?
So I was pretty much coming to the kind of CID crime management fold early in service after a couple of years, and carried out the detective constable role within the CID, then the detective sergeant role, and then obviously into the temporary role as detective inspector.
And if the chair wants to know a little more about that, is that available in the document? I referred the roles and rank and roles and training documents.
In terms of my postings, yes.
Yes, thank you. And tell me, is the awareness course of a particular duration, and how does that differ from the full course?
Again, it's changed over time. I think it was maybe at that time it was just a couple of days, and I think there was a few of us that were going to be performing similar functions. Mm-hmm. So it was just an opportunity to try and, as I said, awareness raising of the role that we were likely to conduct during that period at a temporary basis before in advance of the formal course.
And how long was the formal course at that time, or the full course?
I think it would be a couple of weeks.
And you've talked about SIO. We've heard that's Senior Investigating Officer.
That's right, yes.
And what does an SIO do?
Depending, obviously, we obviously explained the name of it. Naturally, you can perform various functions, and that on that day was the on-call SIO or duty SIO for the whole of Fife, just to more give that investigative oversight of every element of ongoing matters, from major crime, critical incidents, sexual crime, missing persons, domestic. So it's an investigative footprint and oversight, obviously complementing the other police functions that are involved as well.
And as an SIO, do you have a team of officers underneath you of less rank than
Yes,
you?
so you would, so in terms of that line management structure, as the inspector, you would have, obviously under that, you would have your sergeants and constables as well.
Right. So you'd have one sergeant or more than one sergeant? Or?
It would vary. So again, on that weekend, in terms of the duty cover, there would be sergeants and detective sergeants in various locations across Fife, just depending on the resource that was on that weekend. So it would vary in terms of the availability of resource.
And the nature of the incident itself?
Yes.
And you were SIO for the on call or on duty that day, SIO for the whole of Fife that day?
That's correct.
And part of that work covered Kirkcaldy?
It did, yes.
It sounds like that would have been quite a big burden or a big task for the whole of Fife on a Sunday. Can you give us some impression of the level of work that would have involved?
Again, it would just vary in terms of the demand and obviously the number of incidents that were taking place. Naturally, the demand and incidents would outweigh the resource available. So it was all about how you would prioritise through the kind of threat, risk and harm, and what you would focus on in terms of that risk management. So there would be a process that you would come in, and there's a divisional log that would pretty much articulate everything that was ongoing within, at that time, the kind of preceding 24 hours, that would obviously give me an understanding of where we needed to focus our attention and resources to.
And was it a matter for your discretion where you prioritised your own attention on a particular day?
So it would vary, because naturally, because of the various amounts of matters ongoing, it wouldn't naturally fall to like the CID or crime management to progress, but we would, as I say, maybe give that advice and guidance and oversight on the various kind of multitude of events and incidents that would take place. So it would just vary. And again, there's obviously other roles and responsibilities within that kind of command structure covering the area on that day.
And tell us about those other roles that you maybe performed on the 3rd of May.
The other roles that were performed.
You've talked about other roles.
Yeah, so as part of me as the SIO, I would always have the PIO, so the police incident officer, who would more in terms of the kind of uniformed element of policing in that day. You would also have your duty chief inspector, who would again be the layer above me, and it would be for us to sit down and discuss what matters were arising, what matters needed the priority attention, and how we aligned the resources to those priorities.
Right. And that was something you were doing or part of on the 3rd of May?
It would have been intentions, but obviously events came before that, yeah.
And you've mentioned a moment ago the divisional log. Tell us about that.
So it is effectively a Word document, and it's on a template that would list those elements that I talked about in terms of, one, the available resource, the line management structure that was on that day. It would then go through your more serious matters in terms of major crimes, critical incidents, sexual offences, deaths, missing persons, domestics, hate crime. So it would just pretty much list the whole kind of workload that the division would had, and then for us to go through and manage that, and obviously align resources if and when necessary.
And is part of that process delegating different incidents to different people within the Fife
Yes.
area?
And something that could be deferred because it's maybe not as a priority or as risk, that it could just be left to kind of do business effectively.
Had you had that discussion of allocating resources before events? You've talked about events overtook. Was that allocation of resources done by the time you heard about this incident, or was it still to be done?
No, in terms of time that would normally happen, say for instance 8:30, there would be the local meetings in terms of the different areas of Fife, and then obviously the overarching divisional meeting where the senior management team would meet to discuss. At that time you are briefed on these matters. At that time you could obviously concur with the action, the intended action, or if there needs to be further advice and guidance provided. So that time hadn't come. So that time when I'd first started was more just that information gathering and briefing myself on the matters that had been taking place.
Looking at the divisional log?
Yeah,
perhaps,
pretty much, and then that's supplemented by station logs as well.
bringing yourself up to date on
That's
what
right.
happened at the previous shift.
That's correct.
Can I look for a moment at what we understand is a day book?
Yes.
PS 18495, please. Now, I've got 6 pages of this on PDF on the screen. You may have a hard copy of this in the blue folder.
I do, yeah.
Oh, do you?
Yes.
I think there are some pages that appear to have been copied twice, both individually and as part of a double spread on the screen. Do you recognise this document?
I do, yes.
And what is it?
That is the photocopies from my daybook.
Was this the day book that you prepared or completed on Sunday the 3rd of May 2015, which is the date at the top of that first page?
That's correct, yes.
And where it says 0910, is that when you started the day book this day?
No, I think that's an entry that would relate to the matter that we're intending to discuss being declared as a critical incident.
Can you tell us what circumstances gave rise to you starting your day book on Sunday the 3rd of May then? Do you have more than one day book?
No, it would just be the one.
Just the one. And what dictates what you've got a day book about, or what you put in the day book, or?
So I think, in fairness, I've obviously heard it referenced before in terms of distinguishing between a day book and the notebook, which is obviously more for kind of procedural recording. This is effectively, because of the kind of multitude of matters that would be brought to my attention, is a book to take my own notes in terms of to refer to it later, and obviously round about the kind of decision making.
And we've heard yesterday from Graeme Dursley about how he completed his day book.
Yes.
And can you tell us a little bit about your practice when you complete your day book?
So ordinarily, again, before obviously events took place that day, and it's maybe reflected in Saturday and the days before, would just be, as I reviewed the logs that we referred to, would just be more teasing out what the priorities were, and either triggers from myself that then during these meetings I would obviously seek clarity on, then obviously to make then further notes to again assist in the kind of decision making processes around them.
So does your day book contain information potentially on the 3rd of May regarding incidents across the Fife area?
It would have, but obviously didn't get a chance to use my day book on that day before events unfolded.
So it looks like there's only a few pages on this day book. Is that because the events overtook you?
They did. So, and again with the times there, I think it was important as triggers to me to note those 2 times. One relates to declaration of the critical incident. The other one I think is the first of the goal group meetings, which I think it was probably my first like a notebook, the first practical opportunity you have to make the notes. Obviously I was otherwise engaged, and it wasn't practical to use my daybook for the kind of actions that I was involved in.
Did you use a different type of book, a notebook for
didn't
those?
have the opportunity.
Right. So in terms of notes that you took on the day, contemporaneous notes, is the daybook the full extent of those?
Yes, but also supplemented, because at a very early stage, or when I started making the notes, I also recorded them on separate policy action books.
Right. And Are they called policy action books?
So there's an action log, and again, with the kind of differentiate, because the Infancy of Police Scotland, there was action logs with the policy bit at the back, or there was actually action logs with a separate policy book. I'm not sure what I used that day.
Okay. And in terms of notes taken that day, would they be in the action log and perhaps with the separate policy?
So
log?
anything noted by myself is either in my day book or transposed onto the action book.
Right. If things were noted in the day book, would they be, as you say, transported, so copied into the action log? Or would they be separately noted in the action log?
I certainly think what was noted in the day book would be the triggers for obviously the actions that would be recorded, probably more in depth and articulated better than the notes on my day book.
But the first point of noting would be from into the day book.
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. And if we see the entry 9:10 and 11:30, is that the first entries that you've made into that day book?
I actually think there's potentially writing on Saturday, at the bottom of Saturday the 2nd of May. I know that's obviously blanked out. I think it is only maybe the call card number for the incident that we're discussing.
Can we move down the screen just to double check? Because I see that part of Saturday's redacted. Do you see just at the very bottom there it says Gary McEwen, I think, and then 0910 critical incident. Is that the first entry that you made?
I think above it there's the call card number and another reference number to a police database.
Right. And we've heard previously that Gary McEwen had declared a critical incident at 0910
That's
hours
correct.
on the Sunday. So the entries we see on the right-hand side at the top are subject, other than the reference to Gary McEwen declaring a critical incident, that's the point at which you start filling in the day book.
That's correct, yeah.
So sometime after a critical incident's been declared.
And at the first opportunity.
Now, before I move on to the events of the Sunday, the 3rd of May, can we look briefly at paragraph 34 of your inquiry statement? And this is your second inquiry statement. I'm just checking myself. And it's paragraph 34, please. And you were asked here about some of your experience leading up to May 2015. And you said, I didn't have experience of dealing with a death in police custody from the SIO ownership element, but I remember a couple of occasions as a police officer or a detective where I was involved in it. Can you give us a little bit more information about this?
Yeah, as I say, I think early in the infancy of my career, having joined in 1998, whether I was in uniform or had joined the kind of CID by that time, it was the awareness of a death in custody, and as I explained about the whole kind of management structure and directing inquiries, I think I was part of the investigation or just action to go and carry out an inquiry on as part of that investigation. Whether it was noting a statement from a witness, I can't be too sure.
So you'd been part of a team investigating a death, maybe as a detective
and just
constable.
more action-led in terms of going doing a specific task to then feed that element of the result of the task back into the investigation.
D.I. Dursley had talked about priority actions and fast actions and tasking constable rank officers with individual tasks as part of an investigation. Is that the sort of involvement you'd had before?
Yeah, so I would have been briefed on the circumstances that would enabled me to go and carry out that action. And as I recall, it was noting statements from the associates of the person that had died.
So when you say you didn't have experience from the SI ownership element, does that mean you hadn't been acting as SIO in any of those deaths in custody?
So the supervision levels would have been above me at that time in terms of directing me and carrying out standalone actions as opposed to being aware of the broader investigation.
So you'd not acted as SIO in any deaths in custody prior to the 3rd of May 2015?
No.
Had you been involved in deaths after police contact?
Not as an SIO.
In any investigations, maybe being tasked with particular jobs to do, actions to do?
I can't recall, obviously, in distinguishing me talking about deaths in custody to deaths following police contact, because obviously in my infancy of my career I probably couldn't distinguish the two. But now with my professional standards experience, I don't like that kind of influences my kind of broader knowledge of it now. So if I was, it would simply be having task driven from the investigation team, the management team, to go and do single focused actions, feed it in. That may have resulted in additional actions, but it probably to the extent of only statement noting.
Okay. Had you been involved before or had experience of dealing with any investigations where PERC were involved?
No.
Before the 3rd of May, obviously?
Yeah, no. Naturally aware of their existence, obviously because they came into fruition at the same time as Police Scotland.
Which we've heard was the 1st of April 2013. How much awareness did you have prior to the 3rd of May of 2015 of PERC and the work they did?
Very little, to be honest.
I'd like to ask you about the incident at Hayfield Road.
Okay.
Let's begin with your operational statement from the 4th of May 2015. So that's PS 00280. And if we can turn to page 2 and look at paragraph 1. And I think what you say here, which is your statement from the day after, about 7:15 in the morning, same date, I was made aware via personal airwave radio that call had been received from a member of the public who was near to Hendry Road, Kirkcaldy, to the effect that a black male was walking along on road in possession of a knife and was attempting to stop vehicles. And was that the first you became aware of a call having been made?
That's correct.
And were you on duty at that time that morning?
Yes.
And then this might be a good opportunity to speak to you about the spreadsheet that's in front of you. If you look at the first page of that, have you watched evidence from previously in the inquiry?
I've seen some, again, with my work commitments as well, and also extracts in media as well.
So you may have seen reference to this. I used it with
Potentially,
other
yes.
witnesses. So it's A3, as you can see. On the left-hand side, we've got a column that gives video timings and timings. In the second column from that, it's audio timings of airwaves. And then in the third column you'll see, or fourth column, you'll see names of people who've made airwaves transmissions.
Okay.
You'll see a description, an event, airwave transcription of any messages over the airwaves, and then just to the right of centre you'll see a description, a sort of thumbnail description of events that we can see on CCTV. And then at the far right you'll see there's a source given. It's in chronological order. And I've spoken to various witnesses about events in it, so you'll see that all the pages are numbered at the bottom. And if I say, just looking at page 1, for example, if I ask you to look at an airwaves transmission at 7:16 and 32 seconds, you'll see that time in the second column from the left. And then we can look further along and see what the transcription of that airwaves message was. Now, in combination with this spreadsheet, you may have seen from previous footage of an evidence video timeline that we have, which brings together lots of images of CCTV, mobile phone footage, that type of
Okay.
thing, dash cams. You might have seen that on the television and media. And what I'll do with this is when I maybe play parts of that for you, but you can always look at the spreadsheet yourself. So you can use that as you wish, and I'll direct you to particular parts when I'm asking you questions. Sorry, that was a bit of a long explanation, but I want you to be able to see what we have. Can we look at your, first of all, look at page 1 of the spreadsheet, and you will see at 7, 16 and 32, which you just mentioned, there was a caller ID as Con 1, which we've heard is someone in the control room, number 1. And it says, I need you to divert to Henry Road in a disturbance ongoing, male armed with a knife, African looking male chasing, someone maybe carrying a knife, described as big with muscles, about 6 foot tall, wearing a white t-shirt and dark coloured jeans. There's another job coming in about it, stand by. And we've heard evidence about calls coming in from the public. We've heard evidence about the control room and storm cards or call cards being prepared. Is this likely to be round about the time that you became aware via your personal airwave radio that a call had been received and near to Henry Road about a black male walking in possession of a knife?
That's correct, yeah.
So in your original statement, operational statement, you'd said about 7:15. It's probably around this sort of time.
That's correct, yeah.
Thank you. Let's go to your first inquiry statement, please. SBPI 00133, paragraph 60. Let me just check I'm on the right one. Yes. And you'll see it's on the screen, and you've also got your hard copy. And you talk about it being a command and control structure. It's all part of the information gathering phase that you try and glean as much as you can to assist the cops that are attending and also to identify the best response. That time, a male with a knife, there was a conventional response. It would be up for the officers on arrival to say, this is what we've got, this is what we need. But you'll see in the airwaves transcript that when they were asking for an update, as soon as they arrive, it just becomes bedlam because they immediately are engaged by the male. Let me just take you through that paragraph and ask for a few more details. What do you mean by a command and control structure?
So I think you referred to it as kind of Con 1 in terms of the control room, that obviously calls into the police are triaged and assessed by our C3 Command and Control Division, whether that's 999 or 101. So when the calls are received and the units are dispatched, they'll obviously give that initial command and control of the response.
We've heard that it was the area control room that deployed officers to Henry Road, the Henry Road area, in response to calls from members of the public.
That's correct.
And then you say it's part of the information gathering phase that you try and glean as much as you can to assist the cops that are attending and identify the best response. What do you mean by that?
So again, I think it's part of the call, any call to police, the call handlers will glean as much information from the person phoning in terms of to assist us in preparing what we're dealing with.
And then you say that male with a knife, there was a conventional response. And what do you mean by conventional response?
Just an overt uniformed response. So at that stage there was no request for CID to attend. It would just be a uniformed policing response to that initial call. Obviously once they arrive at any call they will make that judgment if they are a sufficient resource to respond to that, or if they require additional units, specialisms.
And you say that's for the officers on arrival to say what they need, or?
And it usually it's the dialogue between them, potentially their supervision, but more importantly, obviously the command and control will still have oversight of that call until conclusion.
And that's, you're listening to that call or those calls on the airwaves radio?
I'm aware of it, but I'm not listening to it probably because
And
airwaves...
what does that mean?
So there's obviously a multitude of calls received to the police on a daily basis. The airwave is very busy. Not on that day or at that time should I add, but I wouldn't. My job is not to listen out to the airwave. I was just aware of it coming in. Again, there was discussion in the office about that's a call, the male with a knife. It probably didn't grab my attention at that stage, if I'm honest, because I've explained about my role that day in terms of the kind of broader picture in terms of what was going on in Fife. So again, with that commitment, I can't focus my attention on the airwave. I just had that general awareness at that time.
So you've got your radio on,
Yeah.
you can hear things coming in, but are you tuned to a particular station, if you like?
Always where I'm based, again, it's Kirkcaldy, so I would turn the radio on and put it to Kirkcaldy because that's where I was located. If my attention was drawn or directed to something else going on in the division, I would turn it to that to give obviously, or to hear it, to listen into the messages, to help inform my awareness should I become involved.
So you were in Kirkcaldy Police Office and you were tuned in with your radio to Kirkcaldy,
Yes.
and you had that on, but you weren't listening or monitoring,
No.
did I say? Not monitoring.
And I think because of the sequence of the call to then hearing the officers attend, whether I asked obviously the officers in the CID office what it was, or they spoke in open conversation, oh, that's a call to a male with a knife. I was aware of it, but that probably at that time it didn't need my further attention.
And we've heard from the police incident officer that day, who was an acting Inspector Stephen Kay.
Yeah.
And as I understand it, he was listening to the radio that day. Is that the type of role that a PIO will be carrying out?
In terms of the uniform response, yeah, that initial uniform response, and I think he would have been based at our headquarters in Glenrothes.
And what would the responsibilities of the PIO be?
Again, just monitoring that, the uniform conventional response until obviously we're satisfied that it had concluded, or like I'd mentioned, whether other resources and specialisms are required.
So a PIO should be, not just have the radio on, but should be monitoring.
Yeah, and I think it would be again, because they've got responsibility for the whole of the division in terms of Fife, they would potentially be directed or to that call by command and control.
Okay. And then you say, but you'll see in the airwave transcript that when they were asking for an update, had you seen the airwave transcripts prior to
No.
the statement? No. So when you're giving this inquiry statement and you'll see in the airwave transcript, is that you suggesting to the inquiry team that's where they should look?
Yeah, because I knew it was audited, so I wasn't personally aware, but from the transcript you would be able to tell
Right.
what messages were passed.
Thank you. Now, could I ask you to look at PERC 00223, please? So this is your PERC statement from the 2nd of June 2015 at 9:40. This is the one we discussed earlier, you said was more detailed. And can we look at page 3, paragraph 5? And if we we'll begin at paragraph 4, and you mention, page 3, let me just check where we are. There we are. So the paragraph 4 was about 7:20 hours, an emergency button on an airwave terminal had been activated. In effect, this gives free dialogue on that area for between 20 and 30 seconds without interruption. My understanding is that no one else can broadcast on that channel at the time. It sounded like chaos with a number of voices being heard. I could also hear what I thought was a female screaming and a lot of shouting. I could not make out much of the dialogue, but I could hear some sort of scuffle and a male officer shout "officer injured" or "officer down" or words to that effect. There was also some mention of a knife just before the update on the officer being down. At this point, I decided to attend the locus. Primarily, I made this decision as a police officer to assist my colleagues, not as a supervisory officer. So you've explained what prompted you to decide to attend the locus. Was it shortly after you heard the emergency button or realised the emergency button had been pressed on one of the terminals?
Yeah, because that's got a different type of alert in terms of the tone. So again, that draw my attention to that.
And did you simply travel to Hayfield Road straight away?
That's correct. Yeah. I think obviously my CID colleagues had travelled just a short time before. Again, with that just purpose of supporting our uniformed colleagues.
You've said there, primarily I made this decision as a police officer to assist my colleagues, not as a supervisory officer. Does that mean really you went as sort of reinforcements?
Yeah, just I obviously didn't know how I would be able to support, but yeah, just to provide support to our uniformed colleagues.
Did that mean that you were no longer attending and retaining your duties and responsibilities as an SIO?
I would always have them, but in that first, it was just the police response to support my colleagues. I wasn't really thinking until I got there to how I'd then be required potentially in terms of that level of supervision.
What time did you arrive at Hayfield Road? Do you remember?
I don't know if I refer to it, but it would only take at that time in the morning with the traffic, it would be minutes, to be honest. So if I'm saying 7:20, potentially 5 minutes later.
How long did it normally take to get from Kirkcaldy Police Office to Hayfield Road?
I would estimate it's potentially a distance of about 2 miles. So as I say, by car, as I say, matter of minutes, to be honest.
Did you listen to the airwaves messages on the radio as you travelled to the scene?
I tried my best, yeah, just to again understand what would be attending or what would be occurring when I arrived.
Sorry, I interrupted there. What did you travel to Hayfield Road in? What vehicle?
It was a works vehicle. It was an unmarked Vauxhall Astra, I think.
What were you wearing?
I was in civilian clothes.
I'm going to now play some footage from the combined audio and visual timeline, video timeline. It's SBPI 00047. You've probably seen this before. And I'm going to ask you if you can identify the vehicle that you arrived in. The section I'm going to ask to be played is from page 6 of the spreadsheet. Okay. So if you want to have page 6 open, sort of open as such.
Quite violently.
If we could just wait a second, please. And I'm going to play it from 7:23:57 to 7:24:11. So it's a short segment, okay. And we'll just we can't always be 100% on the seconds, but it'll be roughly okay. That period of time. And if we look at page 6, just in advance of that, if we look at 7:23:57, you'll see that's towards the bottom of page 6. And if you look at the description on the right-hand side of that sheet, it says a dark-coloured vehicle approaches the roundabout from South Henry Road and appears to have some flashing lights at the rear window. It passes the light-coloured vehicle that is on the roundabout and turns right into Hayfield Road and continues up Hayfield Road, coming to a stop just past. Do you see that?
Yeah.
So that's what we're going to be looking for, and we'll play it, and then I'll ask you some questions if you're happy. If it's too quick, you want to see it again, that's not a problem at all. So if we could maybe play from 7:23:57, which is on the screen.
Get an ambulance, please, for PC shot. Roger. Go ahead. Yeah, I'm on route to bed, I think it's
Thank
the
you
same
very
mail.
much. So did you see that vehicle coming? Perhaps we can go back to 7:23:57, and you'll see in the CCTV at the bottom of the screen that when I ask that this be played, you'll see it arriving from the bottom right, travelling up towards the roundabout that's on the left-hand side of the screen, and it'll turn right into Hayfield Road. And we'll see as it turns right that there do appear to be lights in the back of that vehicle. It's a dark grey vehicle.
That's the vehicle I was
I
travelling.
was going to say, did you
It's
recognise
a
it?
Vauxhall Astra with lights in the rear, and so it's unmarked. It's got lights in the front grille and in the rear window.
So if you have to respond to an emergency, you can put the lights on.
That's correct.
And I think in your statement you refer to strobe lights. Would that be the lights that you're talking about? Let's look at that again.
Control, can you get an ambulance, please, for PC shot? Roger.
If we just stop there, please. So we see you going, effectively cutting the roundabout, turning right, and then travelling into Hayfield Road. And is that where you parked the car that day?
That's correct, yes.
Thank you. When you arrived, the male, who we now know to be Mr. Bile, was on the ground.
That's correct.
And officers were around him. How long after you arrived in that grey vehicle did it take you to realise that somebody was on the ground?
Very quickly, I think. I explained that my CID colleagues had attended just in advance of me. So when I turned up, they were the kind of first port of call, just to really get an understanding of what had taken place, what they had witnessed.
And what were the names of your CID colleagues?
So it would be at that time DS Sammy Davidson, Samantha Davidson, and DC Derek Connell.
I was going to say DC Connell as well. And you'd also been listening to the airwaves transmissions. So were you aware by that stage that the male was on the ground?
I can't say for certain, but naturally when I arrived, within the minutes, I could see that he was on the ground, yes.
After you parked the grey vehicle, how far were you from the male on the ground with the officers around?
Potentially 10, 15 yards, perhaps.
Now, in Perk 223, page 4, so this is your Perk statement from June, 2nd of June. Page 4, paragraph 7, so it's the second last paragraph on that page, there we are, starts my recollection. And the third line you say, I had a clear view of the group of officers, 3 of whom I know from working at Kirkcaldy Police Station. You see that?
Yes.
Now, in your first inquiry statement, and I don't need to take you to this, at paragraph 13, you say, I know all of the officers in the Team 4 response team. On the 3rd of May 2015, did you know all the officers in the Team 4 response team?
Within reason, I think, again, as part of the inquiry statement, there was maybe a couple of names, officers that were introduced that I either don't remember seeing on that day and maybe knew the name, but maybe not as well as the rest of the team. And again, as I started that day, I couldn't tell you that was the team that was working. It just obviously developed once I was there and recognised them.
When you said in this statement, the Perk statement, you had a clear view of the group of officers, 3 of whom you knew. So you give their names as Constables Alan Payton, Craig Walker and Alan Smith.
That's correct.
Are those 3 of the officers that you saw
Yes.
around the male on the ground?
Or in the vicinity, not necessarily.
Or in-
Yeah.
So tell us what you saw.
So again, and again, this is where we talked about the anomaly that I think in the original statement, I thought I stopped in the car, spoke to Sammy, and then went round, parked, and then come back. It transpired from the CCTV because that was the Gallagher CCTV, I think.
Yes,
that
that's
Puck
correct.
showed me on that day that they were noting my statement that wasn't the case, and as it's depicted there. So I got out of the car, went to DS Davidson, and she obviously explained what.
Where was she?
She was more standing in the middle of the roadway, again a short distance away from the officers and Mr. Bio.
And what direction was she facing?
I couldn't tell you.
Towards the officers who were around
At
the
that
man?
time potentially, but as we started to discuss, we were obviously surveying the whole area where the incident had happened with various considerations in mind.
And tell us where you could see, let's start with Constable Payton.
Again, I think I've tried to articulate in the statement.
Is that in the next paragraph? The
Potentially,
final
yeah.
paragraph?
And again, over time, what I've seen in the media is how that's influenced it. They were definitely the three notable because I probably knew them, not saying the best, but the most out of them, and in terms of their description as well, they were probably stood out for me.
So I'm really interested in your own recollection of the events that day. Have you listened to a lot of media and watched a lot of media since
and
then?
not through a conscious effort. It's just obviously been just how it's played out. So, in terms of thinking of it now, not being tainted by that, would be the majority of people on. So they would be on the side of Mr. Bio, and that was the majority of them, with one person, and this is where Alan Smith stands out for the most, because that's the person that I heard, and also noted in terms of his previous experience in terms of officer safety, because he was an officer safety instructor. So that's why I mentioned the three, predominantly all on the one side, so not on both sides, on the one side of Mr. Bio, and then one person who I thought was Alan Smith, kind of directing their actions in terms of what at that time was the aftercare.
Right, so let's try and get a clear picture of what you saw. You see the car arriving on the video.
Yes.
You get out the car, out the driver's seat, you're driving, and you can see the officers with the man on the ground.
Yes.
Where's the man's head?
Facing south towards the houses.
So that we've heard that there's houses on one side of Hayfield Road.
Yes.
And on the other side of Hayfield Road, opposite the houses, is a sort of grass, verge area with trees.
That's correct. And with me in the middle of the road, his feet would be closest to me as opposed to his head.
Right. And you said you were about 10 to 15 yards, feet?
Yeah, it was, in close proximity. But obviously, as my statement outlines, that wasn't predominantly the main focus of my attention.
And when you talk about officers being on one side of the male, was that the side closest to you or the side furthest away from you?
I think there was obviously an angle, but they would be facing me.
They were facing you away
Yeah. So
on the other side of
their
the
backs would be
the
to
male.
the houses.
And describe what position they were in as you saw them.
So they were pretty much in one line from the feet to the head. And again, I can't recall, maybe 3 or 4. And as I say, my attention is drawn to Alan Smith in terms of the instructions and guidance to his colleagues in terms of the aftercare, because by that time he had been restrained.
Where was Alan Smith?
I've got him at the head end facing me, so again his back would be, so if they're aligned with the back of Mr. Bio, he was at the head, as I say, given that aftercare instruction.
So his back was to the houses?
Yeah, so he would be facing me, and then I think there was then left a couple of officers on the kind of periphery, which we've used for basic inquiries or basic actions at that time.
And you've mentioned Payton, Walker and Smith. You've told us where Smith was. Where was Payton, insofar as you remember?
Couldn't tell you what order, but I've got them, Alan Payton and Craig Walker as part of the officers that are aligned to Mr. Bio.
And they were facing you said?
Yes.
You've said if we can stick with this page and the final paragraph on this page, this is Perk 223, page 4, paragraph 8. I could see that the male was a black male and he was lying in the recovery position on his left side, with his head facing towards me and his body was essentially at right angles to me. Do you remember that?
But the way I've just depicted it there, he would be lying on his right-hand side.
Yeah. So do you think your Perks statement's more likely to be correct?
My recollection is correct. I think I've maybe just mistaken the left to the right.
So when you saw the male lying, tell us your recollection now.
He's on his right-hand side.
He's on his right-hand side. And so do you think your Perks statement is incorrect?
Potentially, yeah. And I don't know if that's then been clarified in the inquiry statement or if it's not been covered.
Well, just from your own
Yeah,
recollection.
no, my recollection now and how I tried to recall it on the day, he would be on his right-hand side.
And you say I could only clearly see his head and his legs from the knees down. He was wearing leg restraints on the lower section of his legs and he didn't appear to be moving.
That's correct.
So do you agree with that
Yes.
part of your Perks statement? So when you saw him, leg restraints had been applied and he didn't appear to be moving as far as you could see.
He was no longer struggling as it had been reported to me as part of the initial response.
I couldn't see his arms or if he was handcuffed. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Although I do recall being told by DS Davidson at some time, either over airwave or personally, that he had been handcuffed to the rear.
That's correct.
Is that your recollection of what DS Davidson told you?
Yes.
And we may have heard other evidence that he was handcuffed to the front. Could this Perks statement be incorrect? Or is your recollection?
No, as I said, that would be my recollection, and I think it's obviously the fact that I couldn't see it, either, even if he was handcuffed to the front in terms of clarity.
And then if we can let me just look at another section. Same statement, page 6, paragraph 1, please. So this is the next page at the top. And you see it's more than halfway down this paragraph. You see the man, now deceased, was still there lying on the ground. Do you see that?
Yes.
The man was still there lying on the ground. There appeared to be no change. I did not see him move. Do you see that as well? Can I just be clear? At any time when you were there, did you see the man move?
No.
You certainly see him in though both paragraphs of your Perks statement say you didn't see him move.
No.
Was there any point where you did see him move?
No.
Did you see the man being moved by officers?
No.
Thank you. That might be an appropriate time.
2 o'clock.